Well, looks like you've stumbled into my little corner of hell. Before I tell you the most twisted crime story of the 14th century, and trust me, it makes your modern serial killer documentaries look like Disney movies, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button if you've got the stomach for some real medieval horror. Subscribe if you want to hear how the biggest financial heist in European history went down. And drop a comment telling me what you'd do if you woke up tomorrow and the government decided your religion was suddenly illegal. Would you run, fight, or would you let them drag you to the fire? Because that's exactly what happened to 15,000 people in 1307. And I was there. I survived it. Barely. My name is Isabeau de l'Artois, former nun, current heretic, professional survivor of the biggest corporate takedown in medieval history. And yeah, I just compared the Knights Templar to a corporation because that's basically what they were. Think Goldman Sachs with swords and crosses. Let me paint you a picture of October 12th, 1307. Imagine Jeff Bezos suddenly declaring Amazon a terrorist organization, seizing all their assets, and burning their executives alive on live TV. That's essentially what King Philip the Fair pulled off. Except instead of tweets, he used torture chambers. Philip wasn't just some medieval Trump having a tantrum. This was calculated, cold-blooded financial murder. Philip was substantially in debt to the Knights Templar, a monastic military order whose original role as protectors of Christian pilgrims in the Latin East had been largely replaced by banking and other commercial activities by the end of the 13th century. These Templars, they were the Federal Reserve of medieval Europe. They had cash, land, political connections, everything Philip needed and couldn't get legally. So he did what any good sociopath would do. He framed them for the worst crimes imaginable. I was at morning prayers in the convent of St. Denis when I first smelled it. You know that smell when meat burns too long? Except this wasn't Sunday roast. This was human flesh, and it was coming from Paris. The bells weren't ringing for prayer that morning. They were signaling the start of the biggest coordinated arrest in European history. Philip IV of France, who was short of money, saw an opportunity to make some. He may also have been uneasy about the Templars' power. He had every Templar in France arrested on the same day in 1307. Sealed letters sent to every bailiff, sheriff, and local thug across France with one instruction: open at dawn, October 13th. It was like a medieval SWAT operation, except instead of drug dealers, they were arresting bankers. And instead of jail time, they got the fire. The charges against the Templars read like something out of a QAnon fever dream. The initial charge against the Templars was heresy. More specifically, when professing, the brothers were required to deny Christ, to spit on the cross, and to place 3 obscene kisses on the lower spine, the navel, and the mouth. They were obliged to indulge in carnal relations with other brothers. They also accused them of worshipping a demonic head called Baphomet. Imagine if someone today accused Apple executives of worshipping Satan in their board meetings while forcing new hires to spit on the Constitution. That's the level of absurdity we're talking about. But here's the truly sick part. People believed it. Why? Because it was easier to believe that holy warriors had turned into devil-worshipping perverts than to admit their king was a lying, murderous thief. I knew Brother Guillaume, sweet kid, maybe 25, joined the Templars to serve God and ended up managing their grain transactions. When they dragged him into our convent courtyard, I didn't recognize him. His feet, Christ preserve me, his feet were gone. Just charred stumps wrapped in bloody cloth. They'd applied animal fat to his soles and roasted them like Christmas hams. One of the most notorious incidents was a knight who had animal fat applied to his feet, which were then set on fire. When he appeared before a legal hearing, he produced his own toe bones from his pocket to complain about his treatment in prison. He reached into his pouch and pulled out 3 small white objects. Toe bones. His own toe bones. He set them on the ground like evidence in his own defense. "Sister Isabeau," he whispered, "they want me to confess to kissing the devil's ass. But look," he pointed to his bone fragments. "I can't even feel my own feet. How am I supposed to remember where I put my mouth?" That's when I knew we were dealing with something beyond ordinary evil. This was systematic, industrial-level horror. Let me tell you about Philip the Fair. And by fair, they meant his hair color, not his moral character. Picture a medieval Elon Musk if Elon had unlimited power and a taste for human barbecue. Always in debt, however, he impoverished the country to pay for his military exploits as well as for his lavish lifestyle. France's debt was not entirely his fault, since he inherited debts from his father's wars against the English and against Flanders. But instead of filing for bankruptcy like a normal person, Philip decided to commit genocide for profit. He didn't just want the Templars' money. He wanted their complete obliteration so no one could ever claim it back. This wasn't passion. This wasn't religious fervor. This was the cold calculation of a man who viewed human beings as disposable assets on a balance sheet. Here's something they don't teach you in history class. The torture wasn't random sadism. It was systematic, bureaucratic, and this will make you sick. It was designed by theologians. In France, confessions were extracted quickly. King Philip was even more impatient than the Pope to get results. The Templars were in royal dungeons where there were no misgivings about using torture. They had manuals, instruction books, step-by-step guides on how to break a human being while keeping them alive long enough to sign a confession. Think of it as medieval Amazon reviews. The Strapato 4 stars. Great for extracting confessions, but subjects sometimes die before the paperwork is complete. The Strapato? They'd tie your hands behind your back, run the rope over a pulley, and hoist you up until your shoulders dislocated. Then they'd drop you just enough to slam your joints back together. Rinse and repeat until you admitted to fornication with goats or whatever they needed for their files. Meanwhile, Pope Clement V was sitting in Avignon, France, not Rome, basically serving as Philip's personal chaplain. The Avignon papacy, a period spanning from 1309 to 1377, stands as one of the most intriguing and controversial chapters in the history of the Catholic Church. This era, often referred to as the Babylonian captivity of the Church, Clement wasn't just complicit, he was an active participant in the cover-up. Imagine if the CEO of a major corporation was also the head of the regulatory agency investigating that same corporation. That's what we had, the King of France essentially controlling the Pope, who was supposed to be investigating the king's crimes. But here's where it gets really twisted. Clement knew the charges were fake. He had to know. But he played along because refusing Philip meant losing his papal throne. So thousands of innocent men burned alive so one corrupt pope could keep his fancy hat. You think we've evolved past this? You sweet summer child. In 2023, how many people lost their careers, their families, their entire social networks because someone accused them of thought crime on Twitter? How many lives were destroyed by allegations that were never proven in court? The medieval Inquisition burned heretics at the stake. The modern Inquisition destroys them with hashtags. Same mechanism, different fuel. Philip used charges of heresy to steal the Templars' wealth. Modern corporations use charges of toxicity or problematic behavior to eliminate whistleblowers and steal their ideas. The execution method changes, but the greed remains constant. The reason I'm hiding in the cellar, telling you the story by candlelight, is because I made a mistake in 1310. I tried to help Brother Etienne document what was really happening. Etienne was a Templar who'd survived the initial arrests by being out of France when the warrant was executed. He came back. God help him, he came back to try to save his brothers. He'd been collecting testimonies, gathering evidence, trying to prove the charges were fabricated. I agreed to help him hide his documents. Biggest mistake of my life. They weren't just account books and witness statements. They were receipts, transaction records showing exactly how much money Philip owed the Templars, exactly which properties he'd seized, exactly which papal officials were getting kickbacks from the operation. It was medieval Watergate, and I was holding the tapes. Here's what Etienne had uncovered, and what eventually got both of us marked for death. The arrests weren't spontaneous. They were planned for over 2 years. Philip's advisors had been studying Roman law, papal precedent, and, this is key, studying the Albigensian Crusade, where the Catholic Church had successfully exterminated an entire religious group and seized their land. They used the exact same playbook. Make accusations too horrible to deny, use torture to extract confessions, then claim divine mandate to steal everything the victims owned. But Etienne found something even more damning. The torture wasn't just for confessions, it was for intelligence. They were torturing Templars to get banking passwords, account information, and the locations of hidden treasures. Let me break down the numbers for you, because this was ultimately about money, not religion. The Knights Templar controlled an estimated 9,000 manors across Europe. They had the equivalent of billions in today's currency. They were lenders to kings, financiers of crusades, and essentially the World Bank of medieval Europe. Philip's debts to them? Massive. His ability to repay? Zero. So instead of defaulting like a civilized person, he chose genocide. Kill the lenders, keep the loans, steal the collateral. It's the kind of financial crime that would make Bernie Madoff weep with admiration. Torture became systemized and routinely used to elicit confessions. But what they don't tell you is how creative these bastards got. They didn't just want confessions, they wanted specific confessions that would justify seizing specific assets. So if Philip wanted a particular Templar castle, the torture would continue until the victim confessed to practicing devil worship in that exact castle, thereby making it cursed and available for royal seizure. It was customized horror, bespoke brutality. They'd literally torture people until they provided the exact legal justification needed for whatever theft Philip wanted to commit that week. But the physical torture was just the beginning. The real horror was psychological. They'd arrest a Templar, torture him until he confessed, then bring in his friends to watch him voluntarily admit to the charges. When his friends saw their tortured brother freely confessing to heresy, many would break immediately. Others would assume their friend was guilty and confess to their own imaginary crimes to avoid similar torture. It created a cascade of false confessions that made the conspiracy seem legitimate to outsiders. Modern police use similar tactics, lie to suspects about what their friends have said, claim they have evidence they don't have, exploit psychological pressure points to extract confessions from innocent people. Here's something that still gives me nightmares. They didn't just target adult Templars. They went after the novices, boys as young as 14, who joined the order to escape poverty or serve God, found themselves accused of participating in satanic orgies they couldn't even pronounce. I watched them bring in young Marcus, sweet kid who'd been a Templar for maybe 6 months, mostly worked in the kitchens. They'd broken his fingers one by one until he admitted to kissing the devil's posterior during his initiation ceremony. The kid was illiterate. He didn't even know what posterior meant, but he signed his confession with bloody fingerprints because they told him it would stop the pain. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with corruption or even ordinary evil. This was pure sadism dressed up as law enforcement. You know what's really sick? We act like this kind of systematic abuse of children is ancient history, but look at any major institution today. The Catholic Church, Hollywood, elite boarding schools, they all have the same pattern. Powerful adults abuse vulnerable children, then use legal systems and PR campaigns to silence victims and protect perpetrators. The tools change, but the evil remains constant. The medieval Inquisition tortured children to extract false confessions. Modern institutions use NDAs, hush money, and character assassination to silence true accusations. Different methods, same goal: protect the powerful by destroying the innocent. By 1311, the terror had spread beyond France. England, Germany, Spain. Every king in Europe suddenly discovered that their local Templars were also secret devil worshippers who needed to be arrested and their assets seized. What a coincidence, right? Almost like they were all copying Philip's business model. In England, they were more creative with their accusations. English Templars were supposedly practicing Jewish sorcery and consulting with demons for financial gain. In Germany, they added corrupting Christian women to the charges. Each country customized their accusations to match local prejudices, but the goal was always the same: steal everything the Templars owned. When Brother Etienne was recaptured in May 1311, my life effectively ended. He'd been tortured before. His jaw was still crooked from his first arrest, but this time was different. Their leaders later denied these admissions, and for that were executed. They weren't just torturing him for confessions anymore. They were torturing him for names. The names of everyone who'd helped him, everyone who'd seen his documents, everyone who might know the truth about the conspiracy. He held out for 3 days. I know because I could hear his screams from my convent cell. On the 4th day, the screaming stopped, and I knew he'd either died or broken. He'd broken. 2 days later, they came for me. Not the local sheriff or even the royal guard, they sent the Inquisition itself. Men in white robes who moved through our convent like death itself, asking questions in voices soft as silk and cold as winter. Sister Isabeau, you were seen speaking with the heretic Etienne. Sister Isabeau, documents were found in your cell. Sister Isabeau, Brother Etienne has testified that you aided his blasphemous work. I prepared for this moment. Hidden escape routes, loyal friends, a false identity. But nothing prepares you for the moment when the machinery of an entire civilization turns against you personally. I ran. God forgive me. I abandoned my sisters, my vows, my entire life, and I ran like a coward into the night. But I wasn't alone. There was an underground network. Former Templars who'd escaped, sympathetic clergy, merchants who'd been cheated by Philip's economic policies, people who knew the truth and were willing to risk their lives to help victims escape. We called ourselves the Silent Brothers. Not very original, but we were too busy staying alive to worry about branding. The first safe house was a burned-out monastery outside Lyon. The monks had been accused of harboring heretics. Translation. They'd refused to hand over their savings to Philip's tax collectors and been burned alive in their own chapel. I spent 3 months living in the ruins, surviving on charity and rainwater, watching over my shoulder for Inquisition riders. That's where I met Marcus again. Remember him? The illiterate kid whose fingers they'd broken? He'd somehow escaped and found his way to the same ruins. He was changed, wouldn't speak above a whisper, flinched whenever he heard horses, spent hours staring at his mangled hands like he couldn't believe they were still attached to his arms. "Sister," he told me one night, "I dream about the confession I signed. In my dreams I can read it, and it says I enjoyed what they did to me. It says I begged them to hurt me more." That's when I understood the true genius of the Inquisition's methods. They weren't just destroying people's bodies. They were destroying their ability to trust their own memories, their own sense of reality. Living in those ruins, talking to other survivors, I began to piece together the full scope of what Philip had accomplished. This wasn't just financial fraud or religious persecution. He had successfully destroyed the concept of sanctuary itself. For centuries, the Church had provided sanctuary, a place where even criminals could claim protection from secular authority. The Templars had been the ultimate sanctuary, protecting pilgrims, managing international law, serving as neutral arbitrators in conflicts between nations. Philip's campaign didn't just steal their money. It destroyed the idea that anyone, anywhere, could be safe from royal power if they became inconvenient. March 18, 1314. The burning of Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master of the Knights Templar, in front of Notre Dame Cathedral. Think of it as medieval pay-per-view execution. I was there, hidden in the crowd, wearing peasant clothes, watching the culmination of 7 years of horror. De Molay had spent those 7 years in prison. 7 years of torture, 7 years of being forced to confess, 7 years of watching his brothers die. When they finally brought him out for execution, he looked like a walking corpse. But here's the thing about desperate people. Sometimes they find courage they didn't know they had. As the flames began to climb his legs, de Molay shouted his final words. "Pope Clement, King Philip, I summon you to appear before God's tribunal within the year." Clement V died of dysentery exactly 33 days later. Philip IV died of a stroke 8 months after that, while hunting wild boar. Was it divine justice? A curse fulfilled? Or just the fact that medieval royalty had short life expectancies and eventually everyone dies? I like to think it was justice. But I also know that believing in cosmic justice is what kept me sane during the darkest years of my life. By 1320, the template was set. Any king who needed money could simply declare a local group to be heretics, torture them until they confessed to imaginary crimes, then seize their property in the name of God. Jews were expelled from France in 1322 using the exact same methods. Accusations of well poisoning, devil worship, and conspiracy against Christian society. Their property was seized, their communities destroyed, their survivors scattered to the winds. The techniques Philip developed to destroy the Templars became the standard playbook for European genocide for the next 500 years. You want to know why I'm telling you this story? Because the same pattern continues today, just with different costumes. Step 1. Identify a group with resources you want. Step 2. Make accusations too horrible to debate rationally. Step 3. Use institutional power to extract confessions or destroy reputations. Step 4. Seize resources while claiming moral justification. Step 5. Normalize the process so you can repeat it with the next target. Whether it's medieval kings stealing from Templars or modern corporations using cancel culture to eliminate competition, the fundamental mechanism remains the same. I spent the rest of my life running. Different cities, different names, different stories about why a middle-aged woman was living alone without family or community. Sometimes I worked as a midwife, sometimes as a scribe, always looking over my shoulder, always ready to run again. I never remarried, never had children, never found peace, but I survived. And survival, I learned, is its own form of victory. Here's what they don't tell you in the fairy tales. There are no heroes in stories like this. There are only victims, survivors, and perpetrators. I wasn't a hero for helping Etienne. I was just a person who couldn't stand watching other people suffer and decided to do something about it. Philip wasn't a monster born evil. He was a normal person who chose his own convenience over other people's lives, again and again, until choosing evil became automatic. The real horror isn't that monsters exist. It's that ordinary people become monsters when the incentives are right and the consequences are distant. People always ask me, could it happen again? What do you think? Look around. Look at how quickly people turn on each other when they're scared. Look at how readily they believe accusations that confirm their existing prejudices. Look at how easily institutions can be weaponized against inconvenient groups. The technology changes. The justifications evolve. But human nature remains constant. Here's something I've never told anyone. In my darkest moments, I wonder if the Templars actually were guilty of something. Not devil worship, not the absurd charges Philip invented. But maybe they were guilty of being naive. Guilty of believing that wealth and power could coexist with virtue. Guilty of trusting a system that was never designed to protect them. Maybe their real crime was thinking they could be both rich and righteous in a world where power always corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. So let me ask you again, now that you know the whole story, what would you do? If you woke up tomorrow and your government declared your religion illegal, your bank accounts frozen, your property seized, and your family members subject to arrest, what would you do? Would you resist? Would you run? Would you trust that the system would eventually protect you if you just followed the rules? Because that choice, that exact choice, faces someone somewhere in the world right now. And based on history, most people choose compliance over resistance, even when compliance means death. The most terrifying part of this entire story isn't the torture, the executions, or the systematic destruction of innocent lives. It's that we're still doing it. Different targets, different justifications, same mechanisms. The Templars were the 1% of their era, and Philip convinced everyone that destroying them was righteous. Modern populations celebrate when billionaires lose their fortunes, politicians get canceled, or unpopular groups face social ostracism. We've learned to make the destruction more subtle, more socially acceptable, more legally defensible. But we haven't learned to stop destroying each other for profit and power. But here's the thing that keeps me going, even in this cellar, even after all these years of running. They killed 15,000 Templars, but they couldn't kill the truth. They tortured confessions from the innocent, but they couldn't torture the guilt from the perpetrators. They seized all the wealth they wanted, but they couldn't buy back their souls or their legacy. Philip the Fair is remembered as a murderous thief. Pope Clement V is remembered as a corrupt coward. The Templars are remembered as martyrs. Truth has a way of surviving even when truth-tellers don't. So here's my challenge to you. Sitting safely in your modern world with your electricity and your human rights and your belief that this kind of horror belongs to the past. When they come for your neighbors, will you speak up? When they come for your co-workers, will you resist? When they come for people you don't like, people you think maybe deserve it, people who aren't like you, will you remember this story? Or will you watch the flames and tell yourself it's different this time? The choice is yours. It always has been.